Hi, good evening.
Hi, Cayetana. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, Cayetana. Good evening. Se escucha el eco. Perdón, está. Ya, así. All right. It looks like it's just us for today. No llega nadie más. And it's going to be 8:10. So, yeah, pues pasaremos así nomás. In any case, I think it's better for you, Cayetano, so you can, tienes todo el tiempo, all the time, all the space to ask as many questions as you want para ir practicando esto con más calmita. Y eso. ¿Me escuchas bien? Porque yo creo que está un cacho congelada.
Okay, I can hear you.
All right, thanks. Dale. So we're going to continue practicing with well, I don't think this class is going to be too long since it's just you for today. So we're going to continue with what we did last class, right? ¿Verdad? No les repuse la clase porque se acabó a la mitad, ¿verdad? Right.
Exactly.
Yes, so we're going to start practicing actually. I think we did one. Logramos hacer un ejercicio, ¿verdad? Antes de que se cortó. I don't remember.
Sí, hicimos uno todavía.
We did one and okay. So, o sea, ya, dale, perfecto. Ya me acordé en qué estamos. So we're gonna do the same thing we did last time. We're going to continue with more exercises. Y si nos topamos con el que ya hemos visto la anterior clase, me avisas para no volverlo a hacer. Sorry, it's this one. Yeah. What topic was it last time? ¿De qué tema era? The last.
Don't remember.
All right.
I have about psychology, defense mechanism. No, I was this yesterday. Maybe
All right, pero si lo topamos igual.
I don't remember.
Yeah, don't worry. Ahorita vamos a escuchar y vamos a ver qué tal. This one is about.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a physical science class.
Did we listen to the physics one? Escuchamos el que es sobre física.
You repeat? Oh, sorry, my cat.
Okay, don't worry. Escuchamos el que es sobre física, or did we do?
Physicals and particles.
It was.
Yes.
Yes, it was that one. A ver si let's check.
Yes.
Did these electrons actually be?
Yeah, justo ese mismo. All right.
Sí, eso lo llevo tiempo.
All right, so con eso out of the way al menos, vamos a ver otros ejemplos. Okay, so same idea, same as last time we listened to the conversation. And then now that we have time, vamos a tomarnos tiempito para preguntar, since we have time, seriously ask as many questions as possible. So, dale, escuchemos.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a literature class. Since the time of Aristotle, thinkers have struggled to define the nature.
Ay, sorry, se está conectando Liliana. So, Liliana and Joaquín. So, les esperaremos. So, we're all on the same page.
Okay.
Hi, Liliana. And me imagino Joaquín más debes estar por ahí. All right, guys. Voy a esperar un ratito más a que se acomoden, se sienten. And
Hi, teacher.
hi, guys.
Sorry,
No,
my brother is without me. I am on.
Okay.
Yes.
Did anything happen? ¿Todo bien?
Yes, he has other classes.
Okay. Yeah, he's probably
Okay.
busy. All right,
Yeah.
don't worry. Pero sí, les decía que last class se ha cortado la mitad también, ¿verdad? La clase. My connection was weird y Zoom dejó de funcionar, pero bueno. Entonces hoy vamos a empezar en realidad lo que ya hemos visto en la anterior clase, which is the fourth type of writing task. No, lo mismo que ya hemos visto. Solo es escuchar an academic lecture and make a summary of that. Solo es hacer un resumen. Okay, last class ya hicimos uno de estos antes de que se corte la llamada. Pero hoy vamos a seguir con los otros ejemplos. Ok. So igual, hi Adrián, good evening. Para los que recién han entrado, ya vamos a empezar. So tengan su papelito or something to take notes. Y los mismos consejos de siempre, escuchen palabras clave y donde ponen énfasis. So here we go.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a literature class. Since the time of Aristotle, thinkers have struggled to define the nature of tragedy. You see, in classic literature, a classic tragedy is more than simply a story about an unfortunate occurrence. No, it's much more than that. A classic tragedy is a story about how a heroic person struggles to find happiness, but they somehow have a terrible flaw that negates the possibility of their happiness ever coming about. Nevertheless, tragic heroes will often accept responsibility for their downfall, admitting where they have been at fault. The audience experiences a sense of release or catharsis when they see the transformation of the characters and the nobility of their decision to accept responsibility in even the darkest circumstances. Aristotle believed that Oedipus Rex by the playwright Sophocles was one of the greatest tragedies ever written. It contained all the elements of a classic tragedy: an unsuccessful search for happiness, a tragic flaw, an acceptance of responsibility for one's faults, and catharsis. Oedipus is a heroic man who is quick-witted, strong, and ambitious. He sets out in the world to find happiness. However, his tragic flaw is pride. His pride leads him to kill a total stranger on the road. It also leads him to successfully answer the riddle of the Sphinx, a legendary monster. In gratitude for his achievement, the people of Thebes make Oedipus the king, and he marries the widowed queen of the city. However, a plague soon comes to Thebes, brought on by the anger of the gods. Oedipus eventually finds out that he is the reason for the plague. The stranger that he killed on the road was his father, and the woman that he married was his own mother. The play ends in sadness and disaster as Oedipus blinds himself and his mother commits suicide. However,
Okay.
before
Okay.
this happens, Oedipus apologizes for his pride and takes responsibility for all that happened, leading the audience to experience catharsis, a sense of release, thanks to his heroism in the face of suffering. No wonder Aristotle praised the play so highly. Using points.
Okay, before we listen to the question, how did you feel about this audio, this lecture? ¿Estaba más fácil que el otro? ¿Difícil? ¿Han entendido todo? What do you think?
For me, it was a little hard.
Okay.
It's like the previous one, the atoms, everything like this. So that's complicated. Some parts.
Is there maybe some words, alguna palabra que hayan escuchado que no haya estado clara, or some part that isn't clear?
Me, the first part, I didn't listen very well.
All right. So kind of the way this is structured, y bueno, les adelanto lo que nos va a preguntar. He tells us the structure of a tragedy. So igual nos da un concepto, ¿no? ¿Qué estructura tiene una tragedia en la literatura or whatever? And then he gives the example of one play, una obra, que tal vez han conocido. No me acuerdo quién es, pero dice una crítica que hace Aristóteles. But the play is Oedipus Rex. Han debido escuchar, ¿no? De Edipo, ese mito. Ese es. So then he uses that as an example. So in all this second half, he gives the example of why, usando estos conceptos, this guy, this hero, Oedipus, es una historia trágica. No? So that's kind of how it goes. So here in the first part, he gives the concept first. So vamos a volver a escuchar eso. A ver.
Fall, admitting where they have been flaw, a terrible flaw that negates is more than simply
Vamos a pausar cuando escuchemos palabras claves, ¿ok? Para irlas anotando.
a story about an unfortunate occurrence. No, it's much more than that. A classic tragedy is a story about how a heroic person struggles to find happiness.
Okay, so a classic tragedy is about a hero. It's about, yes, eso, hero, palabra clave. Ahí está una.
But they somehow have a terrible flaw that negates the possibility of their happiness ever coming about. Nevertheless, tragic heroes will often accept responsibility for their downfall, admitting where they have.
Hasta ahora, otra palabra clave, he mentions a terrible flaw. That's also important. Y luego en el ejemplo de Edipo lo usa, ¿no? Oedipus was prideful, era muy orgulloso, and that was his flaw. So eso lo va a mencionar en el ejemplo. Entonces igual. What else? ¿Alguna otra palabra clave?
have been at fault. The audience experiences a sense of release or catharsis when they see the transformation.
Es igual, palabra clave, release or catharsis. When he says it as well, pausa, ¿no? Como que hace una pausa y dice release or catharsis. Entonces esa palabra también es importante.
Of the characters and the nobility of their decision to accept responsibility in even the darkest circumstances. Aristotle believed that Oedipus Rex.
So up to there is the kind of definition, and the rest is, you know, giving the example. Cuenta el cuento que esta parte es similar a esto. Blah, blah, blah. So eso. So a way we could structure it, si les cuesta mucho, a ver, let's do this one together, okay? If the words are kind of difficult, if the concepts are a little, they're not fully there, no les falta un poquito de información, what you can do is grab those key words and say, a ver, ahora sí escuchemos la pregunta.
Of release, thanks to suffering. No wonder Aristotle praised the play so highly.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain why the professor thinks that Oedipus Rex meets the definition of a classic tragedy.
Okay, so igual, siempre hay que buscar responder la pregunta. In this case, it's asking why this play is a tragedy, según el profesor. So, we can mention directamente, para resumirlo, para si no están muy claros los conceptos, we can say the professor states that the structure of a tragedy or a tragedy contains or a tragedy must contain tal. ¿Qué palabras claves hemos anotado? Must contain a hero. It's about a hero who has a flaw, and this hero must find catharsis. Dando esa respuesta, ya se nos van los 20 seconds necesarios para el primer punto. And then we can talk about the examples, ya que da en el caso de Oedipus Rex. In his case, he mentions, no, Oedipus Rex, in the case of this play, the hero is Oedipus. His flaw is that he's proud or prideful, no, su falla es que tiene orgullo. And the catharsis is that, ¿se acuerdan cuál era el punto catarsis de Edipo? In the example he mentions?
Accept responsibility.
He takes responsibility for his actions. So ahí está. There you have the 3 ingredients and cómo se muestran en la obra. So you can kind of structure it like that in this case. Y eso igual les salva. Por eso, guys, if you're not really sure of the topic, si es algo muy ajeno a su área, if it's something you don't fully understand, las palabritas claves les ayudan mucho a armar su respuesta. So, ahora que hemos aclarado todos esos detalles, all the information is clear, right? No sienten que les falta nada. Todo está clarito del lecture. Ahora sí, we're going to take 30 seconds to prepare the answer, and then we're going to answer. Okay. So you guys have 30 seconds starting now. All right, guys, who would like to share?
I can go.
All right, thank you, Cayetano. Dale, your 1 minute starts now.
The lecture, classic tragedy. After introducing the topic, the professor explains about what is a classic tragedy. It's about one hero, one character that wrote in a hard way in order to find the happiness. He explained one famous history. that they explain that there was a hero that is so proud, but in the way they started to change or her mindset in order to accept a responsibility.
All right. Thank you, Cayetano. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I wanted to say about the catharsis and release, but I forgot it.
The time. A ver, up to where we were, I think the time management, si no era del final, at the beginning you were doing great, ¿no? La introducción más o menos 15 segundos. So that was perfect. You introduced it well. I also like that you used your own words, ¿no? Pese que en este caso I kind of helped you guys with the structure. You still used your own words. You didn't repeat words exactly from the lecture. Y eso siempre muestra que han entendido lo que están diciendo, ¿no? So use your own words to make your answers. And I think the time management is a little bit of the problem here. Creo que se falta un poquito de fluidez and talking a little bit faster, guys. Eso igual tienen que tener cuidado de medir su velocidad a la que hablan, which is just practice. No, it's just a matter of practice. Si hablan muy lentito, no van a tener mucho tiempo para mucha info. Si hablan muy rápido, se les va a perder todo el tiempo y les van a sobrar 10 segundos. So it's kind of just practicing for that. So thank you, Cayetano. One more for this one. Who would like to share?
I can do it.
Dale, Adrian. Okay, so I'm going to give you your 60 seconds. Starting now.
Okay, according to the reading passage, a classic tragedy story is about a hero who struggles to find happiness and usually accepts the responsibility for his own downfall. In the lecture, the professor shows us what classic tragedy is by providing the example of Oedipo story. He illustrates this by saying that basically Oedipo is protagonist in the death of a man on the road. And later, he marries with this man's widow, but in addition, suddenly he finds that the man who died on the road was his father, and the widow was his mother. So he decides to take responsibility, just like the professor said, blinding himself, and then his mother commits suicide. So that's why this example is great to show what a classic tragedy is.
All right. Thank you, Adrian. Wonderful answer. All the information was there. I also like that you retold the whole story, the Oedipus. You mentioned all the points. And in telling it, you also show that you retained all the information that they gave you. So, eso, igual, more than a correction, I think we can kind of make this better. No, o sea, en vez de corregirlo, kind of like darle más sabor. At some point, you said a classic tragedy is about, y luego mencionaste los puntos, ¿no? There we can use consists of, would be more, más kind of a complex phrase, but we can use classic tragedy consists of, da, da, da.
Okay.
And la pronunciación igual. When mentioning the name of the play, you said it in Spanish. You said Edipo. And eso igual, if they give you the name in English, debería ser Oedipus, que es el nombre de este.
Okay.
In English. Pero other than that, great answer. El cierre, todo, the way you connected the ideas, I think it was great. So thank you, Adrian. All right. Now we're going to move on to the next one.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a literature class.
In the 8th century BC, a legendary author named Homer wrote 2 epic poems. You probably know them already, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're fascinating poems, really, partly because they give us such a clear window to the culture of the time. But what culture or what period of Greek history was Homer describing? His own era or an earlier one? It's an interesting question, but it's very likely there's no real answer. You see, Homer was working in the oral tradition. Before he wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey down, poems were told and retold by generations of storytellers. Each generation added details to the poems, so it's likely that these poems are actually this. They're an interesting mixture of historical details about a bunch of different time periods. So let me give you a couple of examples. Here's one. Homer describes helmets made out of boar tusks. Well, just these kinds of helmets have actually been discovered in sites dating back to the second millennium BCE in Greece. They weren't used in later time periods. That's a pretty clear indication, right? So clearly Homer's poems preserved some authentic details about the distant past, and some would argue that's the era Homer intended to write about. But then we take a look at another detail and it's a bit more nebulous. Homer describes chariots, horse-drawn wagons carrying warriors into battle. He describes them as simply carrying troops on and off the battlefield. That might be how chariots were used in Homer's time, sure, but in earlier history, the time when those helmets might have been used, say, they were used in battles themselves, the chariots, that is. So this is a good example of Homer adding details from his own world into the poems.
Using points and examples.
Okay, before we listen to the question for this one, is there anything that wasn't clear? Algo, any word, any part of the lecture? Ok, ya, vamos a escuchar entonces la pregunta. Acá.
Poems.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain why the professor thinks there is no real answer to the question of what period of history Homer described.
Okay, is the question clear for this one? La pregunta está clara. Here we have it again. Using points and examples from the talk, explain why the professor thinks there is no real answer to the question of what period of history Homer described. ¿Clara la pregunta? Yes, no, kind of. All right, I'm going to trust en que está clara la pregunta. So I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds to prepare your answer, starting now. All right. Liliana, would you like to share?
Okay, teacher, but I'm not completely sure.
All right, don't worry. If you get nervous or anything, we can stop, we can start over. Vamos a darle una más. Your 60 seconds start now.
Okay, the listening is about the how describes the time of the culture, the enumer. The teacher says that it's a question that he can respond because it have a lot of details and point and have a lot of periods too. And it's discovered in 2 millions maybe, but these things can be in generation. It's stored in the time that it have a lot of details and point. It for this is very difficult now the correct answer to this question.
All right, anything else?
No.
A ver. So, a ver, que ya, faltaban, you stopped at about 45 seconds, so te faltaban unos 15 segunditos. Which, a ver, ahorita veremos cómo podíamos haber cerrado esa idea. In the beginning, you mentioned when introducing the topic, you said in Homer. So I imagine you meant no todo el trabajo en general de Homero que menciona. But we could say that as in Homer's work, no? En el trabajo, or in Homer's plays, or in Homer's poems, que habla sobre sus poemas. So los poemas de Homer. To precisar un poco más exactly what about Homer we're talking about. I also like that es igual, siempre se pueden apoyar con esto, guys. If you're not sure how to start, or una buena forma de responder la pregunta is giving the same parts of the question, or using the question in the answer. No, so you started off with there's no real answer to when Homer was talking about, or kind of igual existen tus propias palabras. So that works perfectly. Pero I think the second, or more giving examples, no dar más claras los ejemplos, ahí se podría haber llenado más el tiempo. I think it was a little, faltaba un poco de información. Okay, but good, Liliana. Thank you. One more. Who would like to share their answer? Guys, one of the two guys. I'm waiting for one of you two to volunteer.
Sorry, teacher, I didn't manage to hear the audio. My battery almost died. So I was
Yeah.
taking the charger.
All right, don't worry, Adrian. Cayetano, would you like to try that to give your answer?
In this case, I don't have idea to how explain this one.
Okay, yeah, this one, ¿qué tal han sentido este? Was it in comparison to the other two? Was it easier? Was it harder?
For me, a little harder because I didn't understand very well the vocabulary.
Mhm. So yeah, he mentions also años, no? Cosas específicas during like certain time periods and things like that. So yes, this one was also a little complicated. But let's also break this down together. No, yeah, because you're just solo somos poquitos hoy día, so we have time to break it down. Okay, so let's go back and listen to the lecture. How can we structure this? First, we introduce it, right? ¿Cómo podríamos introducir? ¿Alguna oración to like briefly introduce it? We can start with simply mentioning the lecture describes now let's go with the lecture questions about what time period Homer's poems were written in, or you can just say the lecture is about during what time period Homer wrote his poems. No, pero eso. Then we can move on to giving the arguments, giving the structure.
Now listen.
Legendary author named Homer wrote two epic poems. You probably know them already, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're
So
fast.
keywords here, he mentions las dos obras, no? Which we also, por conocimiento general, we can kind of get a hang of them. They're the Iliad and the Odyssey, que igual deben conocer. So, palabras clave para su respuesta. Next, we have
Fascinating poems, really. Partly because they give us such a clear window to the culture of the time. But what culture or what period of Greek history was Homer describing? His own era or an earlier one? It's an interesting question, but it's
so there's another important idea. It's not clear what time Homer wrote about.
very likely there's no real answer. You see, Homer was working in the oral tradition. Before he wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey down, poems were told and retold by generations of storytellers. Each generation added details to the poems, so it's likely that these poems are actually this.
There's another key idea. Poems could change because they were told and not written down. There's another key point que se resume en una oracioncita.
Interesting mixture of historical details about a bunch of different time periods. So let me give you a couple of.
So up to there, we can kind of give an explanation in the first part of our answer of why we're not sure what time period this was written in. And then he gives the examples. If we're not sure of how to name the examples, porque mencionan, ¿no? Que los cascos que se usaban en el año no sé qué, y que los chariots se usaban en el año no sé qué. If we don't remember that, we can simply say there are elements, no, idea general, there are elements in these poems that are from different time periods. El primero que menciona creo que es el...
Of examples. Here's one. Homer describes helmets made out of boar tusks. Well, just these kinds of...
So we can say helmets. The helmets he describes came before his time, but, y la otra cosita que menciona are the chariots. So the chariots he describes are from his time. So for this reason, it's hard to tell what time period Homer writes about. Listo. So that would kind of, igual, same thing, guys. When you guys don't really, when cuesta encontrar, entender algunos conceptos, cuesta entender un poco de vocabulario, listen for keywords. Now that that's clear, would anyone like to give an answer? O probamos uno diferente y a ver qué tal con ese. Let's try a new one. Let's try another one. Un ejemplo nuevo. And con esos tips en mente, lo respondemos. All right, so we're going to listen.
Now, listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Let's talk about two kinds of biological selection. Two different ways that traits are selected in a species of animal as it breeds and reproduces. First, there's natural selection. Here, living things develop features that help them survive in a certain kind of climate, escape from a certain kind of predator, that sort of thing. In contrast, we have artificial selection. Artificial selection happens outside of what we'd call nature. It happens when people deliberately breed living things for their own use. Now, it's true that natural selection and artificial selection both give a living thing the traits it needs to reproduce and survive. But these two types of biological selection also have very different effects, obviously. Maybe one of the easiest places to see this difference is with wolves and dogs. Let's start with wolves. So, what's a wolf's job? It's to survive in the wild and get enough to eat, right? So certain qualities are naturally selected. Wolves need keen senses so they can detect prey. They need to be fast, strong, and aggressive to catch their prey, and to survive even in the harshest weather. Wolves that are born with these qualities live longer and pass the qualities on to their pups. That's natural selection. But a dog's job, its role in its environment, is a little different. Dogs don't need to survive in the wild. They need human protection. So to survive, a breed of dog needs to have traits that humans want. Take the golden retriever. People bred a dog big enough to be a good hunter, but not so big that it was hard to control. And it had to be obedient, unlike a wolf, right? A golden retriever has to be, well, friendly in order to be well-liked enough that we humans decide to breed it, so we can get similarly friendly puppies, more pets.
Using points and examples from the...
Okay, before we listen to the question, is there anything that wasn't clear about this one? Vocabulary, any part of the lecture? Todo claro? Okay, so ahora sí, we're going to listen to the question.
Friendly puppies, more pets.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain the two types of biological selection.
Okay, so we have to explain the two different types. I'm gonna give you guys 30 seconds to prepare your answer. Sorry. Starting now. right. Who would like to share their answer? Como es la última, los tres van a compartir, but who wants to do it first?
Me, teacher.
Dale, Liliana. Thanks. All right, so your 1 minute starts now.
Okay, the listening is about two kinds of selection, the natural selection and the artificial selection. The natural selection is when the animals need to survive in the wild, jungle maybe, and they need to reproduce without help the humans and the artificial things. The example that teacher says is the wolves because they need to be faster, stronger to cap the prey. The artificial is when people help to animals to do some things, and the example that the teachers gives is the dogs. The dogs, there need to be friendly, human protector, and it's different to all because they're done to survive in the wild. So this is the examples the teacher gives to explain the natural and artificial selection.
Perfect, right on time. Thank you, Liliana. And wonderful structure. Sorry, espera, mi batería se está para apagar. All right, sorry guys, ahora sí. Decía, the structure I think is perfect, timing everything. The introduction, brief, concise, you used your own words throughout. Y esta estructura for this type of, para cuando te das, primero te da el concepto y luego te da los ejemplos, what you did I think was wonderful. No, you gave first the concept of biological natural selection and the example of the wolves. And then in the second part, the concept of artificial selection and the example of the dogs. And yes, to close it off though, hubiera dicho, maybe these are the examples the professor gives to explain the difference, ahí clave, the difference between these two types of selection. No, y eso, con eso está perfect. Thanks, Liliana. Next, guys, who would like to go next? Cayetano?
Yep.
All right, thank you, Cayetano. Vamos a ponerte tu minuto. And your 60 seconds start now.
The lecture is about biological selection, that is how the animal can survive in each environment. The professor explains two types of this. The first is artificial and natural. He provides all two examples. The first is about the wolves, that is a natural selection, that because wolves adapt their bodies in order to live in a wild environment, they need to be strong and live a hard environment. And on the other hand, the dogs need humans to survive. They need to be obedient and they are friendly. So this behavior was adapted by humans.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Cayetano. A ver, en cuanto a information, I think it was well summarized. All the information was there. The introduction was the right amount of time, 15, 20 seconds. I think though, sí has logrado responder todo, but the first part was a little too long, and the last part, the second part, felt a little rushed, un poquito apurado, but everything was there. So I think it's just a matter of practicing the timing, y todo lo demás está perfecto. Thank you, Cayetano. And finally, Adrián.
Okay.
Dale, te pongo tus, your 60 seconds. Starting now.
Okay, the lecture states two kinds of selection, artificial selection and natural selection, where the biggest difference is basically that in artificial selection, we can see that there is human intervention. In addition, the professor showed us an example to show us more clearly, the difference between this kind of selection using the wolves and dogs. First of all, wolves survive from the wild and need to find food, so they must be hunters, and only those who have these qualities can survive. On the other hand, dogs don't need to survive, need human protection in order to be obedient, friendly, so they are more pets than wolves. So that's why the difference is big, and there is a human intervention.
All right. Thank you, Adrian. Igual, perfect answer up until the very end. I think the last 5 seconds, I think you rushed it un poquito. I think you kind of, estás puesto nervioso al final,
Yeah.
right? A little bit. Yeah, but don't worry. Other than that, hasta esos 5 segundos, I think it was great. Yeah, really, there's nothing much I would add. The vocabulary, I really like that you're ampliando tu vocabulario. Siempre les digo, guys, the vocabulary makes the difference. So you can tell que has estado trabajando eso. Okay, so there, guys, we're gonna leave it there for today. Les voy a reponer la clase que no hemos podido hacer el miércoles, el lunes a esta hora. Bueno, el lunes a las 8, guys. Okay, sorry por el inconveniente, pero eso. So, for this type of task, for this part of the exam, is there any questions, any comments? Igual lo vamos a seguir viendo el lunes, pero por ahora alguna pregunta, comentario. No. Okay. So, esperen un tantito, les saco. And bueno, guys, ya saben, les envío su encuestita and you fill it in and you can leave the meeting. So it was great to see you guys today, and I hope you have a nice weekend, and I'll see you guys on Monday.
Thanks, teacher. Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
teacher.
Goodbye.
Bye.